That's what Chamonix means, this mystique, and the Mont Blanc being the highest gem in the whole range. Everyone wants to come climb it. It's absolutely gorgeous. That in the end, the folk that came was like, oh, Mont Blanc that was amazing. But that thing we did on that rock bridge, that thing blew my mind. I'm a mountain guide, and yeah, absolutely the most classic thing you can think of when you talk about mountain guides is like, how do you know if there's a mountain guide at a party? They'll definitely let you know, right? So it's important when you come to Chamonix that you find yourself a licensed mountain guide that has some experience in the range, but is, you know, working legally in these mountains with the appropriate insurance and everything like that. And we'll talk more about what that means at the end when we talk about hiring a mountain guide. What we're going to do tonight is talk about a little bit of the history and the birth of alpinism, as well as the guiding industry. We're celebrating the 200th year anniversary of the guides in Chamonix. So that's a big historical event for sure. And we're going to talk about what type of opportunities are available for everyone, all different types of abilities for sure. It's literally, Chamonix has everything to offer from hill walkers till extreme climbing. So we can talk about some ways to prepare. And then what we'll do is we'll just do a chronological progression of what it looks like to climb up the Gouter route, which is one of the classic routes that people do on the Mont Blanc. And then we can get a little bit more into what it looks like hiring guide and some recommendations on what to look for when you start communicating with people to have an adventure here in the Alps. And then I believe we'll touch base on the questions that have developed in the chat box downstairs at the end. You know, this is what people think about when they think Chamonix. They think this big, massive alpine climbing. Here is a great example of probably the most climbed route in the Alps. It's called the Cosmic Arête de Cosmiques, and it's just a great outing for folks to have to get their big toe wet and what it's like to be up in the Mont Blanc Massif. In the background here, you can see some of the Massif that we'll talk about. I like to divide up the Val d'Arve. You can see down here is the river down there is the Arve River, and that's the village of Chamonix. And on that south side of the valley there, we have our Mont Blanc Massif, and the Aiguille de Chamonix are all those rocky peaks that you can see. The middle peak here is the famous lift goes to the top of there from the mid station called the Aiguille de Midi. And when you talk about the Mont Blanc, you talk about a Massif. And we have ourselves, these are the four main peaks of the Mont Blanc Massif. The Mont Blanc de Tacoul is right here. The Maudit is right here. The actual summit of the Blanc is back here. And this is the Dôme des Gouter. On this side of the river, we're climbing in what's called the Aiguille Rouge. If people come, you know, I highly recommend you do 3 one-day trips where you try to sleep up high at a mountain hut and experience 3 different types of, you know, alpine or rock climbing, or alpine rock climbing, or glacial travel that we'll look at for 3 days, or you go and do a 3-day trip where you spend 2 nights up high as well. Either way, the objective is to spend 3 days getting to know your guide, getting to know how the rope works and all that stuff, and as well as sleeping high, climbing higher, and getting acclimated so that you're going to be able to be fit and strong and have a good day on the Mont Blanc. Another great thing to do is we can ride the famous train that was built in the late 1800s. The Mer de Glace is an incredible ice flow that comes down, and we can take the Montanvers train up there. And then we can utilize this zone of ablation where most of the snow melts during the summer, as opposed to where it accumulates up high. So here it's all ice during the summer. And it has these beautiful spots to be able to teach crampon and ice axe techniques, and getting a little bit of vertical ice climbing here as well. It's a gorgeous moulin down there you can see, where a river in the glacier has kind of made a corkscrew and eroded it out over the years, ground it down. So sometimes we head up there, up to the Mer de Glace. This is a great shot. You can see the Aiguille de Midi from the other side. There's some fabulous rock climbing on the golden granite here. This is the Cosmic Arête that we saw earlier, the Arête de Laurence up to the Cosmic Hut. This is collectively what they call the Vallée Blanche, which is a collection of a whole bunch of glaciers that come in from Italy and France and all merge and eventually merge down into the Le Chaux and form that Mer de Glace that we saw. These are some satellite peaks of the Mont Blanc range. And this is the Tacul de Mont Blanc that we saw the other side that was heavily glaciated because it's on the north side of the mountain, this being more of the east and southeast. Glacier walks are a super fun way to get up high. You know, families often enjoy these. If you're doing Mont Blanc and have your wife and kids or other people here that don't want to climb Mont Blanc, then you can certainly go up and have some adventures with them as well and keep it simple. You know, a lovely 3-day tour that we often do out of Chamonix is heading over to Switzerland. It utilizes 2 nice huts up in the Albert Premier. You can cross this Trion Plateau here and sleep at a nice cabin on the other side, just below the sun. Both of them allow you to be able to sleep high, but then get used to being able to working together as a team, working on the rope, getting used to your crampons, and gaining some elevation by climbing a couple peaks. This is on the way to the Aiguille Tour, just to get a little more elevation, which often involves some rock scrambling and people needing to get used to using crampons. Oftentimes, if we have snow or ice and rock, we just keep the crampons on the whole time. And a lot of people aren't used to that unless you spent time in the Alps. So it's good to put some mileage in before you head on to Mont Blanc. So we try to pick those peaks if people need that experience. If people come and they're like, I got to climb some beautiful granite. I hear there's amazing golden granite. So this is on the satellite peaks. This is the Petit Capucine and the Roy Siam route on the Pic at Alfray, where you do a glacial approach, leave your crampons and boots at the base, and you climb technical rock to the top and rappel back down. That's a great way to get up high. You know, we talked about the glacial tours. Oftentimes people, oh, it looks pretty mellow. We know what we're doing on the glacier and whatnot. The Vallée Blanche in the area from the Aiguille de Midi or the Skyway on the Italian side is heavily crevassed and definitely gets worse during the summer and later in the day. So I think it's just another reason to, if you're going to go wandering around out on the glaciers, this is a great example of why you want to hire a guide. So those are all crevasses, which you can see where the white snow is as opposed to the darker snow. And oftentimes in those depressions is where it's sagging down a little bit. So you wouldn't want to go walking through those zones because it could be just a half a meter of snow that collapses and you fall into, you know, a 30-meter or more depth of a crevasse. Definitely need to be using the rope and thinking about hiring a guide if you're not comfortable in that terrain. If you want to get up high off the glacier, here's a couple great options. This is up on the Dent de Géant. The photo on the right is really indicative of most of the classic routes you hear of in the Alps that are AD plus type routes that you know the names of. They're often equipped. So this is on the Dent up on the slabs, and it's fixed with ship ropes that's really thick enough that it's comfortable on your hands. So you can just grab onto them and put your feet on the wall and yard yourself up. Yeah, it's not really climbing, and you can definitely climb this in rock shoes and in boots, and it has plenty of gear, which is a great option as well. So you can challenge by choice again. Lots of guides like to use fixed ropes because one of the biggest hazards on this is the electricity. The dent sticks up really high in the range and can be a complete lightning rod. So it's important to get up and down it quick. So we have to just use the ropes and yard on them. I think that's important to realize when your guide is on a route like that. They're trying to use their timing and their pace to try to mitigate those hazards, because time's often the biggest hazard in the mountains that people don't recognize. So come and really being efficient at putting on layers or taking off your coat and putting it on, and the pack on and off, because all those little 2 and 3 minute things add up. So lots of times on a route like that, your guide's going to kind of be moving with a sense of urgency and wanting to get it done. So oftentimes you have to kind of follow their lead, because we like to be casual and mellow when we can be, but then when we got to go, we all just got to go. So the dent's like a big objective. Over in the Aiguille Rouge, sometimes if the weather's bad, we can still get people out moving around on alpine rock ridges, perhaps getting themselves into what it feels like to be in boots and crampons on rock and snow again. This is perhaps one of my favorite warm-up climbs on Treves Traverse, the Aiguille on Treves. Can see the gorgeous Aiguille Noire in the background there, on the Puleio Aiguille Blanche in the back that head on up to the Mont Blanc. And that's the longest ridge in the Alps. The Puleio Integrale comes up out of the Val Veni to the summit. And when we do a day like on the Treves, it's just all about like learning to move together and understanding how the rope works when the guides are using different techniques and transitioning from being long lining on the glacier to short roping on the ridges or short pitching where it's a little bit steep and harder, and trying to keep it flowing. So great training grounds. Oftentimes these are objectives that in the end, the folks that came and climbed Mont Blanc was like, oh, Mont Blanc that was amazing. But that thing we did on that rock bridge, that thing blew my mind. So sometimes people end up getting an experience they didn't quite know they were going to get because they get so focused on the Blanc. This is an extension of the Entreves, which I like to do with people. We can go right on all the way up over the Toul here, and then down in the back here. This is the Denta Gigante, and that's the lightning rod that I was talking about. So oftentimes we like to get up this ridge and over here and up and down that as quick as possible. It's a great view. Just to show you, the Entreves is truly right along the border of Italy and France. You have Courmayeur, and down, extended down here is the Val d'Aosta. And out back here, you have the highest peak in Italy, the Gran Paradiso, which is right over here. And a lot happened on that borderline during the wars, a whole bunch of history. Yeah, these are more technical stuff, doing the Louis Rochefort up to the Dome Rochefort on the right, and the Pain out of the mid station at the Midi. These are much harder climbs that involve a little bit of fifth class climbing as well as short roping on ridges. So it's just kind of bumping it up. This is the Tour Ronde. It's kind of a lot more loose in years. So having this snow right now that we're having will make routes like this be a little bit more in condition for longer. That's the gorgeous view of the Mont Blanc in the back. And from this angle, you can see one of the peaks we saw from the other side is the Maudit, the Mont Blanc, and the Tacoul would be over here. And that's the Blanc. But this is Courmayeur de Mont Blanc, which is just a few meters lower than the 4810 of Mont Blanc. Maps over the years have shifted the border of where Italy and where France is to include, like older maps include the highest point in Italy, but now it's in France. So it's always been kind of disputed, as well as the elevation. Some maps show 4807, 4808. This is the Gran Paradiso, and it's the highest peak in Italy. If you don't do a whole bunch of warm-up climbs in the Chamonix, out of the Chamonix Valley, doing those one-day trips from a hut like the Torino or the Planigui hut, then you can come over to a really gorgeous park and spend 3 days climbing up in this amazing valley and staying at gorgeous huts with super good food at the Refugio Chabot, and then doing what's more like a real feel of your fitness, because the summit day from the Chabot to the summit of the Paradiso is a good 1,100 odd meters, which is more in line with what the summit day of the Blanc is. It's just over 4,000 meters, 4,061 meters. It's a glacial climb that has a little rock scramble at the top. This is my family at the top of the Gran Paradiso last summer. We took advantage of the COVID time and not having a lot of work and less people in the mountains. So that was pretty fun to get the whole team up there. So that's all kind of like the precursor. Oftentimes you contact a guide and you say, oh, I want to climb Mont Blanc. And they're like, oh, what have you done? And maybe we should get together and do our acclimatization. And then do Mont Blanc. So often Mont Blancs are done in a 6-day program, sometimes a 5-day program. So you utilize the first 3 days of, again, sleeping high, climbing higher for a couple nights, getting to know each other and getting dialed in on your systems. And then you come back down, sleep in the valley, get some, oxygen-rich blood again, and then you start your ascent on the Mont Blanc. What I love about Mont Blanc personally for me is, well, as a guide, it's hearing everyone's experience about what got them to climb Mont Blanc and why they're there. That's pretty amazing. But then what I really love too is thinking of the history involved here. And Mont Blanc was, first tried to be climbed from the Italian side, from this guy Saucier, who hired guides out of Italy. And I really appreciate that. That was in 1760. And being Sicilian and trying to represent Italy, I'm like, yeah, they tried to climb from the Italian side with the Courmayeur guides first. So that's pretty cool. And then it was Baume and Dr. Picard and the crystallologist Baume that were the first to climb it. And this was in 1786, 10 years after the American Revolution, which is pretty phenomenal when you think about. And then it was in 1823, they did the first guided ascent from Chamonix with the guides from here. So this is why it's the 200th year anniversary. So that's pretty special when you think that you're walking in those footsteps every time you get to go up on the Blanc. So when you leave the valley down in Chamonix, you usually leave, most guided parties are going to utilize a lift system, the Bellevue lift. And the Bellevue lift's going to bring you up to the Col de Chaux and Col de Vosa. And you're going to get on a train. And there's these trains that were built, you know, around 1900, it's like 1906. And he had them built in honor of his 3 children. And this is the one, Anne. So you ride the train up for a good amount of time, and you end up getting out here to start your ascent up the Gouter route on Mont Blanc. People say, oh, I'm going to go do the normal route on Mont Blanc. It's usually this one. It ascends the Aiguille de Gouter and then the Dôme de Gouter, and then it merges in with some other climbs and continues up the Boss Ridge and the Summit Ridge to the Blanc. So we leave the train station and we are ascending what's called moraine, and it's going to be where the glacier came down and basically pushed off all the debris to the sides or to the end, and it's often loose, and usually there's goat tracks that run through it. So we just kind of meander up these goat tracks for a while. It's a solid 3-hour walk. This is right at the end of the train. There is a hut out here that you can stay at, Refugio for food. This is the Aiguille de Bionnaise and the Bionnaise Glacier coming down. And this is the launching point. And as we ascend up the trail, you get just an amazing view of the Val d'Arve over here and the Aiguille Rouge coming up out. This is the Aiguille de Midi, which is the noonday needle right here, and the Midi Plan and the Aiguille Vert. And you can barely make out here Les Dreux, and right up over this pass here into Switzerland. Sometimes folks show up and they think the mountain huts we're going to stay at are going to be these like really primitive shelters, but in fact they're amazing, almost like hotels really, that have fantastic food, very comfortable place to be able to rest. They're usually off the grid. They're supplied by helicopters. You usually get your dinner and your breakfast and your night, and it's super reasonable. So this is called the Tête Rousse hut. And Tête Rousse is pretty much where most people are going to start from. There's multiple ways to do it. I like to think of it as a chocolate chip cookie. There's tons of recipes. They all taste good. You end up getting what you get based on the hut reservations. The Club Alpine of France, CAF, they basically have a computer system, and you have to be able to get online at the right time and be able to reserve your spot at the huts. So that's one of the most challenging things for guides to negotiate for their folks, is to be able to get the hut reservations. So depending on what you get for reservations kind of dictates your itinerary, believe it or not. Sounds strange, but that's how it goes. So we work with it. Sometimes I go from Tête Rousse to the summit and back to Tête Rousse. Other times you don't go to Tête Rousse and you go to the next hut up, which is called the Gouter hut, to the summit and then back down all the way. So depending on how you slice it dictates how long of an ascent it is from the hut. Right outside the hut here is the little pocket glacier of the Tête Rousse. So we're leaving here at 3,167 meters is what the hut's at. So outside the back of the hut is what, when people say I'm going to go climb the Gouter route, most people who know about it talk about the Grand Couloir. And there's always this communication going around the valley about what the conditions are like in the Grand Couloir. And a couloir is essentially a corridor of snow between 2 rock ribs. You can see this rock rib here and this rock rib here. The very top of the Aiguille de Gouter, you can see the old Gouter hut and the new Gouter hut. Some completely different conditions here. You can see on the left, early season, it can be often all snow, and things are pretty good if the temperatures stay cold and there's a good boot track. But then when it transitions and the snow starts to melt and you can get this river kind of flowing down, it can kind of start making some stones fall and whatnot. You can see over on the right here, this is probably August time, where it's completely dry. And then you can see the discoloration here is from some recent rockfall. And when we leave the hut, we head up this little pocket, Tête Rousse Glacier, over this little rock rib, and essentially you have 100 meters that you need to cross through the couloir, where there's definitely the objective hazard of stonefall. You know, in recent years with the freezing elevation going so high, our isotherm, or where it's 0 degrees C, sometimes has been above the height of the Mont Blanc in recent summers. which makes it so that a lot of the permafrost that can hold these rocks in place is going away. And it gets so bad that sometimes the mayor down in Saint Gervais will shut down the route and not allow people to climb, and they'll put gendarme out there and stop people from going. So if this continues, the rumor is that they're going to try to re-equip this ridge line here. They may have to go up and move a bunch of rock, but put the route here so that people don't have to pass through that couloir. So we'll see if that happens or not. And in that case, they would unequip this. When you pass through the couloir, as soon as you go over this rock rib, you just need to carry on and get yourself over to a little bit of a shoulder where it's safe. There's definitely places you can go in the mountains where you don't stop, and this is one of them. So just keep moving through the couloir. This is an example of when that river, or it's kind of eroded out. This is a close-up view of that, about 100 meters. You can see the cable running across there. What guides like to do to mitigate this hazard is, aside from like, I wouldn't be going there if I hadn't have already been watching the weather and make sure that the isotherm is low enough that things are freezing, that there hasn't been any major rock falls, and that we have good weather in the forecast with cold temps. But then once you get there, you've already decided to go there and you're going to reevaluate. This is an example of a guide who is communicated with someone else who said, hey, can you watch uphill for me? I'll go across and you yell at me if rocks are coming. Because oftentimes the crampon in a cross here is challenging. The footing can be horrible. Sometimes there's water flowing. Sometimes it's all loose. So it's better off to pay attention to your feet and then ask a person on the sidelines. So you can ask that woman who's sitting there, hey, I'll watch for you if you watch for me. Or if you have guides, we try to team up and do that. So yeah, the cable is something people dispute, to use the cable or not to use the cable. What you can't see in the photo is there's cliffs below. So if you do get taken out a little bit by a rock, maybe you won't be able to stop in time, depends on conditions, before going off the cliff. So some people will utilize the cable and some people won't. It all depends on the time of year and the snowpack and everything in that moment. The best thing to do is just trust your guide and know that it's for them, it's another day of work, and we all want to go home and do what we need to do that afternoon anyway. So we're not going to do anything outrageously crazy. So I'd say just trust your guide and go with it. But some will use it, some won't. It depends. If you do use it and you're a recreationalist and you're not with a guide, just don't do what I've seen people do, where they clip in a tiny sling, like an 80 centimeter sling, and then they get out in the middle and they get boinged off. So then they're free hanging out there because the cable goes away from the footing, from the track when you get to the middle. So they kind of get popped off and then they're swinging around in space. If you're not with a guide and you're going to use the cable, clip in with a rope that you can give yourself some slack and extend it so that you don't get boinked. Top tip there. So you get yourself across this couloir, try to utilize other people to help you. Hey, now we're up on the rib. I'm going to show you, this is the Tête Rousse hut down here, all this zone, and this is that pocket glacier. And we went over the rib, and you can see the people right here. So that's where the cable is. That's the couloir. And you get yourself across there. And when you get in here, there's a little bit of a shoulder by an old ladder, and that's like the only spot I stopped in the 680 meters that it is from the Tête Rousse hut to the top of the ridge. Let's try to get our layers right, start cool, and we get across the couloir and we get here and it's like, okay, we need some water and change your layer, do it now. And then I just kind of get on the ridge and keep it going. This ridge here is loose. And when you get towards the top of it, people can kick down stones to people in the couloir. So you need to be really careful that as you climb up, you're staying more climbers right than climbers left. People get drifted off to the climbers left over here. And then the fall line of their feet over their loose stone is dropping down. And again, another tip, if you're going to be up there without a guide, is one of the things that we see often with the non-guided parties is people will have their rope running very long. Guides are going to be 2 meters apart from their clients and their clients from each other. And we're going to move together short roping, maybe some short pitching. But what I see is people running 30 meters of rope out, and then it's dangling through loose stone and the rope falls off onto the stone and it kicks the stones down the couloir. So a lot of people actually drop stone onto people that are passing, because you can see that these 3 people here And if you're out here, your fall line is right down to them. So just take heed and make your rope short to keep the stone away from people. You know, there's always a debate. Do we leave early at 2 a.m. breakfast or the 4 a.m. breakfast from Tête Rousse? And it's all conditions dependent. It's different every time. You got to play it, read it as you see it. This is leaving around probably 4 a.m. Getting the sunrise. You can see the Guida Beyonce behind us. And sometimes you're walking on goat trails, super casual, short rope, casual rope mode. And then sometimes you have to turn and face in or turn and face out where it's a little bit steeper. But oftentimes on this 680 meters of scramble, if you trip, it'd be easy to go kind of start cartwheeling down. So if you're not with the guide, again, you want to keep that rope short because you're going to minimize the load on your partners. You won't shock load them. So here you can see the distance in the rope. The woman out front has just gone down a step and she turns and faces in, makes the move, and then we turn and face out and keep motoring. So, you know, sometimes it's sunny and the next thing you know, it's raining. So this is an example of being on the ridge, caught out, coming down from a summit day. And we had total sunshine about a half hour before, and this storm came in. Luckily, it lasted about 15 minutes. But from my empirical knowledge, information, everything I've seen on this particular spot on the mountain is whenever the clouds come in like this and you have some precip and wind associated is oftentimes when the natural rockfall starts. And in the top, there's kind of this little basin above that in the start of that couloir where when the fog comes in or these clouds come in, you can often get rockfall. So be heads up of that. This day we definitely had rockfall in the couloir, I remember, which I do have a video of later. So at the very top of the ridge, you've been on this rocky ridge for about 680 odd meters, and you get up to the snow and you have this beautiful new Gouter hut. So this is the new Gouter hut. It was built maybe 2015 or something. Took a couple summers. It's a gorgeous timber frame structure with Streskin panels, you know, that's sheathed on the outside. It's solar and it literally hangs over a 600-meter cliff. It's a pretty sweet spot. My favorite thing about it is that they made a crampon friendly boot room. So if I leave the Tête Rousse hut early, it takes a solid 2 to 2.5 hours to get to this hut. That's climbing about 700 meters. And we just walk right in with the crampons and the rope, sit down, eat, drink. From here up, you're going to be moving slower and more aerobically. On that first section of the ridge, it's very anaerobic where you kind of scramble and and then stop and try to catch you. But from here up, you're just going to get on that like diesel motor train and have a nice aerobic pace going. So the winds often pick up around dawn, as we know. And we end up putting on some more layers, eating and drinking, and head out the door to start our ascent up. Oh, it's about 400 odd meters from here. This is just under 4,000 meters, and we're going to ascend up to the Dôme de Gouter, which is at 4,300 meters. This is the sunset. It's a great spot. If you end up there that first day, then you get the sunset from the Gouter. You can't be complaining. This is the old Gouter hut, which slept a considerable less amount of people. It was always problematic with people camping around it, but the gendarme had eliminated the camping, so there's not as much crowding on this route as there used to be 10 years ago, which is nice. We used to have to climb over tents and such. So they cleaned all that up, makes it a much more enjoyable experience for sure. Depends on when you leave. This is essentially the positioning of that Gouter hut is about just on the other side of this here. So you come out of the Gouter and you walk this gorgeous ridge and you're going to start working your way up what's called the Dôme de Gouter. It's a long glacial walk. We've been short roping as we go up the ridge because we're using the short rope to protect people from falling off the mountain. But right now, we're worried about people falling in the mountain because we're on a glacier with snow. You're not sure where the crevasses are. So we use a rope and we extend out so that the counterbalance and the friction of the rope and the snow allow us to hold the fall. So we're essentially long lining up through some of this glaciated terrain to our first high point. And if you get there at sunrise, it's been a long climb so far from Tête Rousse. And yeah, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous place for sunrise. Hormonal cocktails are starting to feel pretty good right about here. Kind of getting your second wind whenever the sun comes up in the mountains. It's kind of a whole rejuvenation. It's the classic rosy fingers of dawn, right? Limitless possibilities here. So this is looking down at the Aiguille de Midi now over here. You can see that in the Aiguille Vert and the Dreux. This is the start of the Vallée Blanche, and this is where the Val d'Arve is. And from the dome, you can finally see like the last part of the Mont Blanc. And you're like, okay, we can do this at this point. You got to go downhill a little bit into the dome, the Col de Dome here. And then essentially what we're going to be doing is working our way up to this Vallée shelter, which is an emergency shelter in the old remnants of an observation shelter here. And then from Chamonix, there are these two bumps on the ridge that look like a camel's hump. I think the old term, French term, is boss. And we have these, the Grand Boss and the Petit Boss. They have two bosses that are pretty steep and significant little hills to get up and over on your way up to this is the Tournai spur that comes up here. And then on to this last hill to the summit ridge. Obviously a windy day right here. Often indicative there is that cloud. It's not quite a lenticular, but it is being blown. The Vallée shelter is not a place where you go camp. It's definitely a place where you go in and change your clothes and get your layers dialed in, eat and drink. And they've eliminated people from sleeping there. And they've finally put in a bathroom as well, some over on the other side. So that's cleaned up considerable amount. So it's a great resource to have. It was, overloved in the past, you might say. So they had to tighten up on it. So Vallée is kind of like, all right, if you made it there and you're feeling good, then you're thinking that you're going to be making it by this time. Leaving Vallée, looking down into the Grand Balcony, this kind of drops way down into the Grand Moulin Glacier. And I love this shot of the Maudit right here. You can really see that peak is gorgeous. If you do the Trois Sommets route, you leave from the mid-station or from the Midi here and you climb over the Tacpoul, the Maudit, and then the Blanc, which is a more technical route. All sorts of conditions you're going to experience here. We were long lining and now we've got a slippery slope with exposure on either side. So you're going to want to shorten up your rope, keep your rope from people's feet. I've seen two parties slip on here and slide. So that's definitely a place you want to keep your rope tight and off each other's feet as you work your way up over the Grand Boss. That's kind of shows you completely different. It can be either icy like the last photo, or sometimes these like awkward boot steps. So you just want to be, trying to move in balance and keep your footwork really good because you're tired when you're coming down, something like that, and tired going up for sure. Gorgeous sunrise from the Vallée shelter on this trip. You can see the shadow cast off the peak of the Blanc right there. People ask, is it crowded on Mont Blanc? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. This is kind of crowded, so that kind of gives you an idea of how many people you might experience. It's interesting at the huts, you can talk to people and see what kind of time frame and what kind of breakfast they're on. And sometimes you can try to get yourself purposely out of sync is a nice thing to try to orchestrate as well. Okay, here we are. This is on the left here is at the top of the Grand Boss, and on the right here, that's kind of up above the Tournai spur over here. This slide's to remind me to tell y'all that, it's either good or it ain't good. When it's not a good situation, it's really imperative that before you did your trip that you get yourself some mountain insurance. I think it's important to have your rescue insurance before you come. And I think most countries, Alpine clubs, you can buy memberships from them and get yourself insurance through them, or you can buy it locally in the valley as well. And this is an example of the PGHM, like the angels from the sky. These folks are amazing with what they do here in the Alps, and particularly in this valley here with responding to people in the helicopter, lowering them down on a cable, long lining, and pulling people off the side of the mountain. It's pretty impressive, the response time and the professionalism and the training and the funding. And it's all good when the weather's good is what I'd add to that. So when the weather is bad, you want to make sure that you're, and you got your self-sufficiency pants on. You're going to take care of yourself and manage your party. And you're going to make sure you use great judgment, expedition behavior to not get yourself in over your head. Because that'd be a bummer to be in a place like this and have something go wrong in bad weather. So yeah, take it more conservative, stack the odds in your favor. And after getting up, this is just after the Petit Boss. This is that Tournai spur, which is a route that comes up from the Italian side. You can see the track in the snow, which was right around in here. It's kind of the last hill up. You're looking down on the Dôme de Gouter here. That's the Vallée shelter on those rocks. This is down in the Miage Glacier, which goes into the Valveni over in Italy, in the classic summit ridge here. You know, we've got Italy on the right, we've got France on the left, we've got sunrise out there over the Monte Rosa Massif, and Matterhorn is out there somewhere. It's a stunning spot to be for the morning. Let's look down the Valde and this is the peak of Puleio, Mont Blanc right here. So when you climb routes on the south face of the Monte Bianco, as you'd say on that side, you know, the classics of the Central Pillar of Frene and the Inanamata and the Briard Ridge, you end up on top of this peak and then you come over to the top of the Blanc. You know, there's the Matterhorn out here. And this is one of those days, it was like me and two other, you know, four of us on the summit of the Blanc. So some days it's crowded, some days it's not. I know that all depends. But this is one of those special moments to have with folks. I've also had the summit of Mont Blanc with just myself and my climbing partner, which is special as well. And yeah, people are so stoked by the time they get here. It's like just as good as it gets. You know, again, it's people's stories that make guides keep going. Some really cool folks out there. So this guy's just totally elated, but I always loved what Ed Viester said with the summit's optional and getting down's mandatory. So you've got to leave enough in the tank. If you're heading down to the train, you're talking about 2,000 meters of descent. If you're heading down the Tête Russe, you're talking about 1,680 meters of descent. And if you're going down to Gouter, you're talking 1,000. So you got to leave enough in the reserves to make sure you do that safely. The one thing I have learned about climbing mountains for the last 30 years of my life is not that many people really care what mountains you climb. So that's an important thing to realize when you're going to do these objectives and you often have like so much caught up in it emotionally. I think it's important to realize that your guide is really there making decisions for your family. And though you contracted them and you're like, you're my man, they're really thinking about your partners and your kids and your family when they make your decisions and trying to have that big picture situation of awareness. Because, you know, when you dance with the mountain always leads is what Dolores LaChapelle always said. And I think that that's how a lot of guides operate. You know, a lot of mountains can be climbed and skied, but the timing is everything. So just trust that your guide has that and is making the good decisions, because sometimes when you're so emotional, you're not able to make good decisions. Or when the hormonal cocktail is just kicking off so good, skiing powder or whatnot, you need the guide to kind of reel you in and be like, whoa, we can't do this because of this, or we can do this because of this. When you get to the top of the mountain, eat, drink, and get ready for your descent. It's going to be fairly long and involved, whichever way you go. So heading down the summit ridge, yes, like everyone is going to tell you, it's always harder going down than it is going up. So practice before you come on going down with crampons. So then it's a nice, safe descent. Just heading down the last part of the boss through the col. Majority of the people say the hardest part of their Mont Blanc summit is this like about 100 meters, not even up to get back to the dome, mainly because of the sun aspect and it's so hot at that time. And then we start running down the dome and you never know what you're going to see. I'd love to know how far this dog got, but I was digging its glasses, so I had to take a picture of him pulling the woman up. So that's pretty fun. And at this point, we're on a mission to get down with these folks. I went down to the train, so it's a long day. So we're going to nip into the Gouter, get a shot of some sugar, honestly. It's a bit of a treat, and eat some bread and then start our descent. I love the fact that I've climbed this thing multiple times in the dark. And then when I've come back down from the summit and I get here and I'm like on the porch and we have to climb down off the porch to get onto these rocks. And the people are like, why are we going down here? I'm like, well, this is the way we went up. And they're like, no, we didn't come up here. I'm like, no, we did. So don't forget that this is a weight in your descent, 680 odd meters down the rib and across the couloir. And it's probably the most challenging movement skills that you're going to require all day. So be on it. So this is people talk about rockfall, and there's rockfall and there's rockfall in a scale of, you know, not that bad to really bad. This isn't really that bad. I wouldn't want to be down there, but we had this happen a half a dozen times during the 2 hours it took us to get down to our crossing. And at that point, you're able to almost start seeing what the timing is. And then there's really bad stuff where you can Google like 2010 and 2014 YouTube rockfall couloir and you'll see huge stuff. But this is kind of when people are saying, oh, there's rockfall. In the old days, it was an isolated stone here and there. Now we kind of have these events that are either like this, kind of avalanches of rocks, or even bigger that are like mass cabin incidents where parts of the mountain are falling off. You know, just manage yourself while you're going down. So you can see all that powdered dust there, just a constant barrage. It starts in the rock at the top of the rocky couloir and it just kind of goes down and off the cliffs there. So it kind of gets your attention, makes you realize where you are and that you're not done until you're done. You got to get through that couloir. Okay, so then you get off the Mont Blanc and what's next, right? Oftentimes after I've done Mont Blancs, I would happen to guess that the majority of the Mont Blancs I've done with people who have never used crampons before. And it's amazing to me at how successful they've been. It's really so cool to see people do things they didn't think they could do and jump in and do something completely new and different and be successful. It's a wonderful experience. And then after that, they're like, so what now can we do? So it's kind of like we get the Mont Blanc done. People are like, you mean there's other things that are kind of like that, but you don't have to walk as long or aren't as long and arduous and more like what we did in the warm up? And you're like, oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. So that kind of, once people get that out of their system of doing the Mont Blanc, I feel like then they can like open up and start thinking about other routes. And it's really just endless possibilities in the Alps. But the Mont Blanc is definitely one of the finest feathers to get in your cap for sure. This is on the last hill going up out of the Trois Saumons route. Very windy that day, I remember that. So this is alpine climbing around Chamonix. Just wanted to use a few minutes to talk about hiring a guide in Chamonix. But I think it's important when you contact a guide to try to develop a relationship with them and to realize that we're all here just to help you out and try to make the safest, best experience that you can have in the mountains and utilize the best of your time. And most of us spend at least 200 days a year in the mountains. So when people contact us to do something, they put a whole bunch of faith in us that we're going to do the best we can to give them the experience for them. So just being honest with them about your experience and your expectations and, you know, your adversity to risk and all that so that they can craft you the type of experience that you want. However it shakes out, I think it's important that you realize that people are people. So I don't just generalize guides as guides and try to connect with them. You know, there's definitely, every guide I've met is definitely interesting for sure, but not everyone's as interested. So I think that it depends on what you want. So it's worth spending a little time with them, buy them a beer, buy them a coffee, see if you work together well. And then build up to some of your experience. I mean, the relationship just gets better. The whole like connection and relationship with the cord. I climb with people for years and maybe they never knew how to climb when they started 15 years ago. And now they're, you know, climbing up over the Matterhorn. So I think that if you go with a guide, you're probably going to end up having a good time, but take your time to pick the right guide that works for you. We're here as a resource for sure.